Sorry. Sorry, still recovering from a cold. Could I have some water, please? Thank you. Oh, tea. Great. This is a work that quietly demands prolonged study, and its subtleties can only be fully revealed with time. There is another work in this section that proclaims its undisguised materiality. Oops, sorry. One that originates here in Taiwan, and again the artist's statement refers only to process. On first viewing the photographic image, it seems simply a ball of clay that has been scooped out by eager fingers reveling in the soggy, juicy mass. But then you notice the scale. Those collections of numbers usually included as part of the formal attachment to an image. You know, the one where you usually don't comprehend well, and it's only when you check with some care, and often with a tape measure in my case, that you get an indication that this work's scale is nothing like what its image suggests. For example, when you encounter the reality, Lucy Ree's teapots are pretty exactly what you might expect. Those from Ken Ferguson are, or were for me, a total surprise in their scale, far beyond any possibility of function, giving meaning to the term, this is about a teapot. In this work, the scale is a Ken Ferguson of a scooped-out ball of clay. At 55 by 54 by 46 centimetres, it was an impossibility to make in the manner suggested as depicted. Instead, as for the Ferguson teapot, it is about that sensation of digging fingers into a damp, tensile, tractable mass. Indeed, the initial imagery suggests enclosing fingers cupping space and thus the medium. It's about that lovely word revived by Peter Dormer, haptic, relating to our sense of touch, something often left out from today's conversations about making and process. There's an affection for the medium here, and a celebration of the pleasurable potential contained within its almost infinite malleability. I'm pleased I asked for another view of this work, as when I looked at the other side, the spontaneity suggested by the reverse is less evident. Here the clay is clearly worked and perhaps a little tired because of it. While the large folds still suggest a formation of fingers, the smaller surface markings seem incidental and even accidental in places, and that fleeting implication of a single gesture has departed. Nevertheless, the work is brave in its simplicity, and the statement underlines this. The artist can take the liberties he has because he understands material form is tactile and invites long considerations with the hands as well as the eyes. There is another work that also revels in not only the material qualities of clay, but augments these by including elements of surface embellishment, appended by the artist in the form of piercing in areas where a rectangle of pale slip has already been applied, and poking with fingers or some instrument, and that offers a grid of dark shadows complementing the areas of slip perforations. There are some rectangular gouges which repeat the geometric, and a fall of glaze that slides across the surface, gathering where it cannot continue because of projections that have not been made neat. These elements are unified by a long journey through heat and flame, and is one of the few works in this section that celebrates this part of the ceramic process. There is more geometry in the form itself, yet this is in no way a series of lines and points in neat array as we usually understand that word, but has been pulled together with a relaxed, unprecious approach, a loose experimental attitude that is consistent through to the statement. Unlike the previous work, this one is smaller than it photographs and seems to be an object with some purpose, perhaps to penetrate or support, but possibly simply to secrete its true purpose within its sealed structure. The distinction between human-made and nature-made has become blurred, and the contained space plays an important sculptural role. I appreciated the complexity within its apparent straightforwardness and the quite poetic history of its making in the surface accretions. Completely opposite to this work are three from the Far East, which evidence an attention to detail, precision, or obsessive repetition that arrive nevertheless also at objects of great beauty. The American work is at one pole, where there is no attempt to conceal means and evidences, or perhaps even exaggerates, the physical attributes of wet clay and the processes to which it is subjected in its transformation through fire. At this opposite pole, ceramics incorporates into its imagery the social and financial values of refined creation, along with the symbolism of whiteness, clarity, and purity. The high skill levels and perfection of accomplishment evident can link the works with that of industrialized technology and division of labor, or rich bourgeois patronage, but these three remain emphatically products of individual expression. In this first one, the Chinese work, those broken rods like paint rollers over seed heads or rice grains are compelling and infinitely tactile. Viewed as best I could, I was conscious of the need to be closer than an image on screen allows and hold or lift the works, as there is surely haptic information and pleasure to be experienced before it breaks further into ever smaller rods. Then, to that seductive Korean staircase, again, infinitely touchable, or could I suggest treadable. The artist's statement about wings unfolding is something of a mystery until one looks at the formation of the stairs, or can examine a close-up of that delicate, seemingly untouched surface, which can suggest feathers from perhaps a swan, and flight into something far from ambient reality. And this introduces connections with the third work in this pale trio, the shrine from Japan, with its stunning surface, so crisp, dense, and unpenetrable, marble or bone. It invites reflections around different ways of articulating grief. Here, porcelain fruit, seed pods, and flowers lie as surrogate offering towards comfort for an ancestor's afterlife. The very different approaches to style and surface caused me to wonder about these polarities, and there is time to only barely introduce this topic. For me, these three latter works were clearly Eastern, while those earlier three Western in expression, despite one originating here. One complication arises when artists from a sophisticated culture pursue a return to the essential malleable nature of the medium, which imposes yet another layer of sophistication and possibly elitism. This is exemplified by Japanese tea ceremony artifacts and has been followed by many Western ceramic artists in the 20th century. I think it has filtered through via influence from Leach, who was trained in the aesthetics of tea. It had basis in a Buddhist theory of simple directness, along with a moral bias against any display of wealth. It seems these days to be an end in itself, and I invite our Eastern colleagues to comment, as we do not observe this trope often in Eastern work. I wonder also about cross-fertilization and cross-cultural influences, and raise for commentary a work by a US artist with entirely Western name, and yet who makes an Eastern-style vessel with cartoonish imagery that seems to depict an Oriental narrative, and where I can find little connection with the somewhat naive title or statement. Or an artist with Japanese name, presumably married to a Scotsman, living in the UK, depicting the dualities in the coyote as mythical trickster. Coyotes are North American, surely. Or another, but with Chinese name, who seems to be making some... Whoa. It's not working. Sorry, no it is. Or another, but with Chinese name, who seems to be making some commentary around Japanese manga, only with glass eyes and Mickey Mouse ears. This section, chosen because they appealed to someone's ideas around mental manifestations, display for me a fascinating hybridity alongside some cultural baggage and interpretations of universal themes, plus many questions around still inviting artists' entries for international competitions in view of contemporary ease of access to the internet. We seem to have a situation of true diversity in which practitioners relate to culture in overlapping circles of discussion. I'm therefore interested in your comments. Thank you.
非常谢谢莫尔女士呢给我们提出那么精辟的这个讲解啊。那个我们现在接着呢我们邀请这个温老师跟莫尔女士呢来跟我们做一些交流啊。那希望在场的各位朋友呢能够提供你们的看法啊，来跟这个我们台上的贵宾呢来共同交流。有没有哪位先开始？我想这是一个非常难得的机会哈。那一位是国内的这个艺评策展人，一个是国外的啊。那他们分别可以从这个东方西方啊，甚至就是我们台湾跟世界啊，在这个陶艺的领域里面呢，在创作上面，在创作的观念上面呢，有一些看法不一样的这个部分啊。希望能够借这样的一个机会呢，能够大家彼此相互交流。有没有？尤其是很像来了不少这个国外的这个艺术家啊，那是不是能够利用这样一个机会呢？也跟我们台湾的艺术家呢能够进行一些交流对话。有没有？好，请。我们请这个邱万长邱老师是不是啊？
喂，今天讲的这个温女士讲的这个重复，这个重复，就提出来的这些作品来看，很多对我来说不算是真的重复，甚至也不是复数的制作，而是因为它上面有很多这些是一个 pattern， 它 pattern 是一种图案。只要是图案的话，它就是一个重复。但是重复的这一种人类很本能的开始，自从早到现在，不单是陶艺，那个毕卡索或者其他很多东西，它是跟这个音乐一样连起来，都是一种节奏。节奏就是图案某一个单元。有统一有变化，在重复之中有变化，结果呢造成一个美感。音乐就是这样的东西。但是这个提出来这个观念是很有趣的，因为台湾的作家很多许多作家，国际上影响过来影响过去，很多有这种现象。比如说，如果说我的那个池子里面的这个洗门还有一个彩虹的那个东西，那如果说根据今天所看到的这个图片来讲的话呢，那也算是重复。可是我看来看去，它不是重复啊，它是一个单元，一件作品，只是它需要为了那么大的东西，需要这个砖头5、6种砖头，然后把它组合起来。所以我就不认为，我到底是重复的界限在哪里？我很想要知道，可能是非常奥妙的，很难的。第二位这个纽西兰的来的这些，我用2个字，因为我听了他以后用2个字，来说明我的心得。第一个就是。ceramics 这个陶艺这个东西跟其他的这个艺术方式，其他的我们叫什么媒体，绘画也罢，雕塑也罢，对一个随便找一个街道上、市场上找一个人来讲，给他们看的话是没有用的，因为这牵涉到一个非常重要的一个字，我认为，而且是我从他的演讲，还有从他 其他谈到的其他的这个艺术家，那个字是英文字，就是 subtlety，subtlety， 因为那是一个非常奥妙、微妙、非常细腻的这个东西。第二个字，他特别提到，然后也让我想到，这个 Robert Frost 这个美国的诗人，他不知道什么地方讲过，他说 poetry。大概是这个意思啊。I don't remember the exact phrasing, but Robert Frost said something like this. Poetry is supposed to be. It is not supposed to mean. 然后我就觉得，这样的一个陶艺跟其他可以平起平坐。为什么呢？因为它是一个 autonomy 这种陶艺作品，它不需要说联想到文学、哲学、什么哲理，它的制作的过程，它的结果，甚至于没有完成，到这里为止，它不需要太多的联想，但是需要非常严格的训练，然后来训练自己。我想参与这样的一个讲习会，就是这个有这个功能 ，autonomy。subtlety 这2个字，谢谢。
非常谢谢这个我们很资深的这个陶艺家哈邱老师哈所提出来的这样的一个见解啊。那我想那个刚刚首先他所提的是跟温老师所讲的这个部分，是不是请温老师先做一个回应哈？等一下我再请莫拉女士再回应。
好，邱老师好啊，非常谢谢你提出来这个问题。我觉得如果我们只是用 pattern 这个字来说明所有的重复的话，我感觉是有一点点不足的。因为陶瓷的制作过程当中，其实真的有许多重复的部分，不管是动作上的重复，或者是呈现在作品中的这个重复啊。那从操作面上来看到多重角度的重复，那这个重复也许用 pattern 来解释的话，可能是一个结果。我们看到结果就是呈现在那个作品中的是一些反复的那些图像或是图样等等。我想或许可以说。用 pattern 或是用 motif 的这种重复观念来看的话，是一个结果论。那我们从许多就是我今天所谈的前半部就是第一个主题，从制作过程的这个角度来看的话，就是去找寻陶瓷跟陶瓷的制作过程中很有关系的角度而形成的那个重复的 pattern 或是重复的 motif。我想我的目的只是在这里，而且是从作品中先看到重复，然后再从笼统的重复当中去看到它是怎么来的，到底作品中想要表现怎么样的重复，去找寻它背后可能的原因。我的路径是这样子找的。好，谢谢。
好，那我们接着是不是请这个莫尔女士呢？针对刚刚邱老师所提的那个部分呢，能够回应一下。
All I got, Mr. Cho, was you being very kind, and I thank you very much for it. Was there a question as part of your statement? Sorry, can you speak a little louder?
I think what I said is simply a personal response to your discourse. And I like it. And I learn a lot from it. I use the word to summarize what I think is what you said. It's the subtlety of the mind, of the words, of the meanings, and everything. The second is autonomy, which means that the ceramics is like a sculpture, like a modern sculpture or painting, which become more and more free from historical, literary, philosophical, semantic associations. It becomes more and more independent, and that's why I quoted Robert Frost. Poetry means It doesn't. Poetry is. It doesn't mean. It means emphasis on its autonomy. Even in the verbal art, like poetry, it can be so independent. It's not the question. You don't have to respond.
Thank you. I was worried that I'd missed something with the translations. Thank you.
Yes, please.
Well, it's an observation and a question. The question is actually, do you concur with this observation about repetition? I've always thought that this growth of repetition as a strategy among younger artists and also among my students was a way for ceramists to come to grips with making work that takes up a lot of space. You know, in other words, it was a strategy under which to make big work that was installation that could come out of the singular object. So a way to do that was to work in multiples and to work, you know, and it was a strategy that was readily available in the sense in the history of ceramics, in architecture and tile. But then when something sculpture wasn't tile, when it wasn't applied art like that, how could you as an artist deal with that when you didn't have a gigantic kiln? So I wondered if you had